you everybody for joining us today as part of the Privacy Exchange Community Show and Tell Show. We are so excited to have Jason Cronk on with us today. We will be talking about privacy by design topics and some privacy engineering topics. So let me introduce Jason a little bit. One of his many talents is that he leads the Institute of Operational Privacy Design, which is an organization that does standards among other things, and they just released a new draft standard for privacy design assurance. In our chat, we'll just go off mute. I'm going to mute you. In our chat today, we will learn a little bit more about that and what the organization's mission is, what these standards hope to do, and how you might be able to get involved. In addition to his work leading the Institute of Operational and Privacy Design, Jason is a principal consultant at Enter Privacy Consulting Group. He is an adjunct college instructor and the author of the book, Strategic Privacy by Design. As an attorney who holds the FIP, CIPP US, CIPT, and the CIPM certification, and he serves as a Privacy by Design ambassador, Jason is a very well-renowned and well-known privacy leader, advocate, speaker, and consultant who we're super excited to have today. So how this show is going to go, Jason and I will spend about 10 or 15 minutes going through some questions that I have prepared for him. And then we will turn off the recording and open up the discussion to anyone for audience Q&A. We turn off the recording so that you feel comfortable asking the question that you would like. As a reminder, the information shared in today's webinar is 100% for general information purposes only and is not and never will be legal advice. So if you have a legal issue or a legal question, please contact your own attorney. So with that all behind us, let's hop in. Jason, my first question to you is, what inspires your work and what common pitfalls have you seen over the years that have led you to develop what you've done with the organization that you lead?
Yeah, so I've been in privacy, privacy and cybersecurity probably 15, 20 years now. So I actually went to law school with an interest of getting into privacy, and then spent many years after that working in a privacy role at NCR, the National Cash Register. And there was a couple of things that I saw that kind of inspired me to do more. So one, I would do a lot with companies. I did a lot of vendor reviews, and we could ask vendors what are you doing for security? And they show us their ISO certification, or they show us SOC 2 or CSA, Cloud Security Alliance certification. What are you doing for privacy? And then it would be crickets, right? Oh yeah, we're taking care of privacy. Here's our ISO certification. Here's our CSA. And it's no, that's security. So there was kind of this disconnect. Or companies, I saw a lot of companies, and there's a lot of companies that are still doing this, where they're saying, yeah, we're doing privacy by design. But are they really? I mean, what are they doing other than sort of kind of being proactive a little bit? But I thought there was, for years, this kind of lack of a systematic approach. Even myself, when I got into meetings and we started talking about privacy, it'd be okay, here's what we're doing. We're building this neat, nifty product. And I'm okay, well, let's brainstorm. What could the issues be? Okay, well, somebody could steal somebody's identity. Somebody could do this. Or our marketing department could go off and, start sending SMS messages, blah, 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 blah. But there wasn't really a systematic approach. So that's where I started developing kind of my approach to privacy by design, inspired by Ann Cavoukian's 7 principles. But I ran into problems early on when I tried to adopt her. It's the same kind of issue. It's I would turn that over to engineers, and they'd be this is great. What do we do? Right? So what's the next step? So I think that's kind of what got me really into the privacy by design, and kind of really kind of to hammer down, what does that mean? What are the practical steps to identify potential issues in a systematic way? What are the practical steps to mitigate those privacy risks? And then follow on how we got into the Institute of Operational Privacy Design was, I originally tried to be part of the ISO 31700 committee, which is Privacy by Design in Consumer Goods and Services. I was involved for a year. The problem was there was like 150 companies, and that was just in the US technical committee, not to mention the others that were in the worldwide part of ISO. And so it just became very bureaucratic, and it was like, what can we get what's the least common denominator that we can do in order to get this past everybody. And so after about a year, I was like, this isn't going to work. I talked to Ann Kabukian, but she was doing something with KPMG at the time about a certification that is still out there. It's run by a different organization now. But and then I started talking to people, Dan Solov, for one, and saying there's a need for a certification. And so we started playing around with what can we do in this regards, and thus we formed the institute going on 5 years now or something like that ago.
Wow. So really it sounds like what you're doing is taking aspirational privacy statements and turning them into a real process so that you can actually achieve those things. So I've looked at your most recent standard, but I would love to know about the Institute of Operational and Privacy Design's first standard, which is called the Design Process Standard. Did I get that right?
Yeah. So when we originally started, we started talking to people and saying, okay, if we were to do this, what kind of certification would you need? And we got people into two different camps. One was companies that wanted a certification for the company, right? Because there may be multinationals or big companies with hundreds of products or dozens of services, and they didn't want to have to certify every process or every service that they did. And then the others were, okay, I'm an app developer, or I'm a company with one main product, and I want that to have a stamp of approval. And so we decided that we would break up and do two, and we couldn't really find, there was no, I don't say common ground. There was, different parties wanted different things. So we decided to first do this design process standard, which basically says, okay, if you've got a design or development process, how do you design your product? How do you design your services? What is, from ideation to design, to development, to deployment, what's the process you take? And how do you inject, what are the components you need to inject privacy in there? Where do you need to do a risk assessment? Where do you need to do mitigations? And those can all be along any of those different design process steps. But that ended up being the design process standard. Say, okay, if you're going to design products and services, this is the things you need to have. There are two prerequisites. And I think one, companies get well, and the second one, they don't. The first one is have a privacy governance, have a privacy program. And the other part of that is having a risk model. And this is where a lot of companies falter. They're either compliance focused, which is fine, but they haven't explicated it. In other words, they haven't like sat down and said, these are the risks that we are trying to address. In a very specific way. Now, I tell you, a lot of companies think they've done it, but they really haven't, to the degree, at least from the systems engineering approach that we take, that you would need to do in order to address those risks in the design of your product or service. So that was kind of the first thing. And we felt that was easier to do from a standard setting thing, because it was a little bit more flexible. And we did find ultimately the design assurance standard, which is the one we most recently are putting out, is more for a specific product or service. And it's a lot more prescriptive, I guess. I mean, it's still flexible, but like, for instance, as I mentioned in the design process standard, the company has to have a risk model. We don't care what it is. You just have to write it down and document that you have a risk model that addresses threats, vulnerabilities, consequences, and who's at risk. I think there's one other thing in there as well. Who the threat actors are that you're concerned about. So you have to have these things in your threat model. But the design assurance standard, because we need to check your design against the standard, we actually specify, here is the risk model you must use. Now, that doesn't mean you have to use it in your design, but you have to, in order to apply the standard, you have to translate whatever your risk model is into the risk model that we offer. Sorry, hopefully I didn't confuse anybody, because this is another thing. We are taking a very systems engineering approach. And I find for a lot of privacy professionals, especially those in the legal community or compliance community, this is a very jarring experience to do this. I will tell you, I gave a talk at one of the IAPP conferences with somebody from NIST and then somebody from the EU, and we were presenting 3 different risk models. So the EU gentleman, Lawrence, he was presenting Linden, which some of you may have heard of. NIST was presenting their PRAM, Privacy Risk Assessment Methodology. And for those of you who haven't spoken at IVP, so speakers will get feedback notes from people who provide feedback to IVP. And one person said, I wish this had been said that this was not for lawyers.
Oh no.
Yeah, so.
Well, that's also like a visibility gap, right? Because privacy is not just what's on the paper, or like the policies or what you're intending to do. You have to also turn that into reality. And that's what it sounds like you're trying to bridge that gap between intentions and what's actually happening, and then checking it to make sure it actually happened. I'm curious, what risk standard do you use in the second, the design assurance standard, the privacy design assurance standard? What risk model do you use?
Okay, so this is a risk model that's very similar to what you would find in my book. So we list out 4 different types of threat actors, which are I'm going to get this wrong on the spot here. So there is the company itself. So whoever is doing, we call it the applicant of the person, a company applying the standard. There are organizations that are contracted with the applicant. So think vendors or customers where they have some contractual relationship. There are organizations that do not have contractual relationships with the applicant. So they may be what we traditionally think of as like third parties, sub processors, sub processors, organizations that are part of whatever you're providing, but they're not there. You don't have a direct contract or a contractual link or a contract that you can go and tell them to do things. And then the 4th one is other parties, and this would be like criminals, hackers, governments who may subpoena data, those sorts of things. Then we have 4 groups of at-risk individuals, and just in the interest of time, I won't list them, but then we have 4 harms or consequence categories that come from Dan Solov's taxonomy of privacy. So this is information processing, information dissemination, collection harms, and invasion harms. And with that, we present that there are 64 potential risks. So every combination of the 4 threat actors, the 4 at-risk individuals, and the 4 harms. And now, a company does not have to do all 64 risks. They can still choose, I'm only going to address this risk, which I think is prevalent. Like if you're an email provider, you only want to deal with spam. You only want to deal with something in terms of, because we realize companies that it could be overwhelming to try to deal with all 64 risks. I mean, ideally we would like that, but it's just not a practical ask in this day and age until people get more mature. So a little sidebar, can I tell you my privacy lawyer joke?
Yes, of course.
Okay, kind of relates to what we were saying before. Okay, so a company is using faces, in their product, or using pictures of people's faces, and they bring in a security engineer, a privacy engineer, a privacy lawyer to deal with the privacy issues. That security engineer says, okay, no problem. We're going to set up access controls. We're going to encrypt our photos so nobody has access to it unless they're authorized. We're all good. We're dealing with the security issues. privacy engineer says, oh, no, no, we need to add, meta tag to whether we have obtained consent from the individuals in order to use their photos for our purposes, and then transmit that consent, downstream to any users or systems using it, then that'll deal with the privacy issues. Privacy lawyer says, oh, no, 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 don't worry. I just changed our terms and conditions to say faces are not personal data. So we don't have to worry about it. Right. So this is the fundamental problem. Companies want to paper over it so that
Yes.
the privacy issues are not issues. And so that's why they hire lawyers. And I'm a lawyer as well. Not that the lawyers aren't needed for compliance purposes and to do good things, but not all privacy issues can be, papered over and just a change in the terms and conditions or the privacy notice.
Absolutely. That was really funny, Jason. And what makes it funny is that it might be a conversation that actually happened.
Right, right, right. Oh,
Oh,
another joke, the consultant joke. You go into a company and the company says, hey, what do we do from a privacy perspective? Okay, here's everything you need to do to improve privacy. Okay, what do we need to do to comply with privacy laws? Oh, okay, well, here's what you need to do with what to comply with privacy laws. Yeah, what do we need to do so that regulators don't actually come calling? Right. So it's a continual, downscoping of of what you have to do, and that's again, that's kind of the unfortunate reality, and it is what it is. So
yeah. Yeah. Well, I like that you recognize that, budgets are not unlimited, staffing is not unlimited, but that's not a reason not to get started. So these standards help give the visibility into what actually needs to happen. So if you are coming from more of a legal and compliance background, what needs to happen on the engineering side to make this a reality. So it's very helpful that you were doing that. I would like to open this up to audience Q&A.